Alright, what's going on, guys? So, Call of Duty Zombies, a game franchise that has been out for over a decade now, has had a large number of Zombies maps and iterations over the years, and this game has been in my life ever since it's released, and I've played each and every Zombies map very extensively, and today, we're going to be ranking every Zombies map from worst to best. That being said, this is Treyarch only, and it feels appropriate to do a ranking of all maps right now because we're at kind of a fork in the road with Zombies. It doesn't look like we're going to be getting a new Treyarch game or any major Zombies content until 2024, so at this point we're at like a moment to pause and really take a look at the past decade of Zombies and rank every map. For the most part, these are going to be ranked on the basis of their gameplay design, and I'm going to try to remove like any sort of nostalgia or other bias as much as that's physically possible, but this is going to be every Treyarch Zombies map ranked from worst to best. And if you want to tell me how bad my Zombies opinions are, you can tell me on my Twitch channel. I'll probably be streaming over there. But anyways, drop a like if you guys enjoy, subscribe if you're brand new, and with that being said, this is going to be quite a long video, so seriously, sit back, relax, enjoy, grab a snack, grab a drink, and let's get into it. Coming in at the absolute bottom of the barrel should be really no surprise to anybody, and honestly, I don't even want to talk about it for too long, but I'm just going to classify Der Untoten and Terra Maldecta, which is the new Vanguard map, technically into one category because more or less they are the same thing. And Vanguard Zombies doesn't work for most people for a variety of reasons, but one of the main ones being that the entire loop of the core Zombies gameplay doesn't even exist here. And not only that, but the game's name is fundamentally tarnished because it launched in what you couldn't even call an alpha build. No round-based maps, no pack-punch camo, no wonder weapon on launch. It was absolutely down horrendous, and it's probably the lowest point for Zombies we've ever seen. That being said, they are doing a lot to update the game for sure, and they're putting some effort into it, but at this point, in a lot of ways, I just think it's too late, and there isn't much they can do to, like, revitalize the game in any real sense, but I had to put on the list somewhere. It's got to be at the bottom. I don't think anybody's going to argue with that, but coming up next on our list is kind of surprising, but I'm actually going to give this to Tranzit. And some of you might be saying, like, wow, Tranzit is really that bad? It's that close to Vanguard Zombies? Not exactly. I still think Tranzit is light years ahead of Vanguard and where that's at, but here's the thing. With Tranzit, and more specifically, a lot of the maps on this list, fun does not necessarily equal a good map. I've had some of my most fun Zombies experiences on Tranzit. That being said, you can fundamentally see where the map isn't actually designed all that well, but that's okay. What you're going to notice, and probably your personal Zombies experience might reflect this too, is that fun does not necessarily always correlate to good, and in this case, Tranzit exemplifies that no better. This is one of the most fun Zombies experiences you can have, I think, especially in co-op. Solo, maybe not so much, but in co-op, it can be one of the most chaotic experiences you've ever had in video gaming. But it's pretty obvious that the Tranzit we have today was clearly not the original intention or design that Jimmy Zielinski and the studio had in mind when making the map. You might call this like a light version of probably what they envisioned that was severely held back by hardware limitations at the time. But that being said, Tranzit is still absolutely iconic in its own right for that very fact. And as I was saying earlier, fun doesn't always necessarily correlate to good. A lot of times that is the case, but this is one of the most pure situations in which the opposite can take place. Very bad design, but incredible fun sometimes. Alright, next up for me is going to be Nacht Der Toten. So why exactly am I ranking this so low? Let me just get one thing right off the bat. I think this map visually is one of the best looking Zombies maps of all time. Aesthetically, it's got one of the best color palettes, and honestly, I'll never get tired of looking at it. But a lot of the gameplay design and the structure of the map itself felt so odd and clunky, and I didn't understand why for a lot of the time. And I've talked about this before, and some of you may know, some of you may not, but to my knowledge, most of the map and a lot of its design wasn't even made by Treyarch. It was made by Activision Shanghai, and this can explain a lot of the like clunkiness in the map layout, the really strange quest design. There's a lot about Nacht Der Toten that just feels really foreign, and I mean, there's a lot to do in the map, don't get me wrong. Like, you can go, there's a ton of things to do and go gather. It's a very fetch quest heavy map, and this is a lot of my problem with Black Ops 4 in general, is that a lot of the maps, sure, they have really great like puzzle design, and there's a lot to do in them, but it's like the zombies themselves are like a side factor. They don't even really need to exist, and you can still do all the things in the map. So it ends up feeling very disconnected. The entire situation with the facility kind of being thrown in there that is utterly pointless unless you're doing the Easter egg. It's a really clear indicator to me that this map wasn't as fine-tuned as it probably could have been, and this was also supposed to be for a Black Ops 4 Season 2 before they had to move it up in the schedule because of everything that happened with BO4 Zombies. Nacht Der Toten could have been an amazing map, but I think was just butchered in its execution. So next up we have Dire Eyes, which again, it really exemplifies the entire idea that a map can be tremendously fun, but still not really that good of a map at all. Die Rise it's basically the amalgamation of Jimmy Zielinski's chaotic brain, where Jason Blundell is order, Jimmy Zielinski is pure chaos, and you see that absolutely manifest in Die Rise. This is one of the things that makes Black Ops 2 beautiful, in my opinion, because while, Jason Blundell maps are amazing and they have like really good core gameplay and structure, which we'll talk about more, but Jimmy Zielinski maps have just this utter chaos to them that there really is no one best way to go about them. Think of like Transit, Die Rise, and Buried. They're very unstructured by nature. You can, build the trample steam on Die Rise if you want to. You don't have to. You can build a sliquifier, not necessary. There's a million ways to approach and play the map, which is interesting. What you lose in that process is like sometimes really good core gameplay that they want you to experience. But Jimmy Zielinski maps are more just like, yo, here's a really big sandbox of just random things that you can use at your leisure. And when traversing the map, the game does not outright tell you how to get from point A to point B, especially when you're navigating across the rooftops of buildings and in between them. The game's just like, yo, here's a bunch of tools, go figure it out, which that sort of like non-structure is charming to an extent, and I really think we've lost a lot of that in recent Zombies. And again, it's one of the things that makes Black Ops 2 so beautiful, is having the juxtaposition of these kinds of like random and chaotic maps with like structured Jason Blundell maps. And from what I know as well, there was at least supposed to be some degree of a survival map for Die Rise, similarly to how Town exists in relation to Transit. There would have been like an on-the-ground streets version of Die Rise that you could have played as like a small survival experience that will likely never ever see the light of day, but we have Die Rise as it is, fundamentally flawed and, very strange execution as a map, but right now it's revered as one of the classics, although it was definitely hated on its release. And another thing you'll notice, especially in modern day Zombies maps, is there's very little wasted space, where that is not at all the case in Die Rise. There are some areas and some playable spaces that serve zero purpose, like at all. There's not part locations to spawn there, there's really no ways to set up good strategies there, they just exist. It's like if you want to play here you can, but otherwise this area serves zero function. It's very strange, but again, it's one of those really like charming, interesting, weird parts of Die Rise. So next up is Dead of the Night, and I've gone on public record multiple times saying that I'm not really a massive fan of this map, and honestly, if I'm not playing Dead of the Night at 3 a.m., I don't want it. So my whole thing with Dead of the Night, and the reason I don't particularly like this map, is not because the fetch quests themselves are bad or the puzzles or anything like that. And on paper, I actually quite like a lot of these puzzles, but the problem is they don't belong in a Zombies map. And I feel like in a lot of ways, Dead of the Night isn't even a Zombies map. Like there's so many parts to gather, there's so many fetch quests you can do. You can stay busy for over an hour gathering and making things in Dead of the Night, whereas in a lot of cases, you'll know what I'm saying, the zombies themselves kind of feel like an afterthought. This map got so far ahead of itself in terms of having puzzles to solve and things to do and parts to gather that it almost forgot to be a Zombies map. And I think, like, besides all of the issues with like Nosferatu and some of the other like boss enemies, I think the Easter egg in theory and especially the boss fight are both pretty cool, but the problem is it just doesn't really feel like a Zombies map. It feels like I'm playing a different video game genuinely when I play Dead of the Night, and I think that's my issue. Not bad as its own game in a bubble, but it doesn't feel like Zombies, and I think that is fundamentally my core issue with Dead of the Night, and probably always will be. So next up we have Nacht Der Untoten, and in all honesty, I had a really hard time figuring out where to put this, and more specifically, I'm talking about World at War and maybe even Black Ops 1 Nacht. I think BO3, the Chronicles Nacht Der Untoten remake, doesn't play very well at all, and I think the Wonder Fizz really dampers the point of what Nacht was. This is literally, again, just a campaign asset from World at War that they threw some zombie models into and just said have fun. Not the most ingenious design in the world, but obviously have to have some kind of reverence for it because Zombies itself wouldn't have happened if this map didn't exist, and fair enough, but the map itself isn't anything too special, obviously. It's very simple, very bare bones, but again, can be incredibly fun. Nacht Der Untoten is a great experience, if you know, and even the older versions of the map hold up even to this day. Nacht Der Untoten is still one of the best maps at at making you feel fearful of zombies, or like making the player feel vulnerable. There are no perks unless you're on, BO3 or BO1, and in that case, it really dampers down the point of it. When you're playing World at War or BO1 Nacht with no Juggernog, you genuinely feel the terror that every zombie can down you in a blink of an eye, and there's a lot of tension in the gameplay no matter how you're enjoying it. So I think there's a lot of what Nacht does right. It's just very simple. I'm not trashing on the map or anything, but it's obviously a very scuffed design, but that's okay. And quite frankly, I think it needed to be scuffed because I don't believe it would have caught the fire and attention that it would have had otherwise if they really tried to make this like overproduced sort of zombies map as the first ever thing. They kind of just were winging it, and that's what made it fun. Next up, we have Alpha Omega, which again is another sheer prime example of a map that had a lot of potential on paper, but ultimately in execution seriously fumbled the bag. And we know that Treyarch was working on this map for the most part, but did get pulled off the project, and it does look like most of it was actually finished up by Activision Shanghai, which again can explain why this map feels so weird in a lot of cases. The layout of Alpha Omega is for the most part just completely pulled and copy pasted from Blackout, especially the lower half of the bunker, and it takes, a lot of the areas that exist outside of the traditional Nuketown experiences and expands on that, which in theory I'm okay with, but the execution was severely flawed. Its Easter egg is interesting, I'll say. It's sort of like Gorod Krovi's quest, where you go back to a machine and do steps over and over again of different, varying varieties and difficulties, and it's just a little bit executed less well than that map. And after spending some more time with it again recently, I've also noticed that just like some other maps, there's a few areas that are completely pointless that I think they had ideas for its function, but I don't think Alpha Omega had enough time in the oven. It just didn't get enough development time, and before Treyarch had to be pulled off the project, and basically Activision Shanghai finished it all up. And as you'll notice, I'm ranking Alpha Omega lower than original Nuketown on Black Ops 2, because while Nuketown itself isn't a perfect map, I think that Alpha Omega lost the point of what Nuketown Zombies really represented. You could argue Nuketown Zombies maybe shouldn't even exist to begin with, like it's sort of unnecessary, and you could make that case, but I think Alpha Omega lost what the entire essence of Nuketown was supposed to be. That is to say, you could have a lot of the gameplay structure of Alpha Omega, but it doesn't have to be Nuketown. It could be any old random facility with a bunker. Not to mention, there's also a lot of very strange choices on Alpha Omega, where to open Pack-a-Punch, you need to clean these valves that more than 4 of them exist, but there's only 4 of them active at a time, and they go down every couple of rounds. It's incredibly annoying. The highlight of this map certainly comes with the boss fight. It's a fight with the Avogadro inside the bunker, in which you basically fill up soul generators in each of the areas. It's a little bit more interesting than just like a 3-phase deal damage to the boss kind of thing, so I definitely give it some credit for that. And the boss fight is for sure the absolute pillar, the pearl, the gem of this map. But unfortunately, you have to go through a somewhat annoying main Easter egg quest to even get there. If I could just play the boss fight of Alpha Omega over and over again, I would. I just couldn't be bothered to do a lot of the quests to get there, and a lot of the map suffers as a result. The map layout itself, compared to others, is alright. I don't have much trouble with Alpha Omega's layout in general. The wonder weapons are pretty much just copy-pasted ray guns that have elemental effects, and those are fun. They're goofy enough that it doesn't take itself too seriously, so I don't have much problem with Alpha Omega in general. It just, you can really tell that this didn't have enough time in the oven, and it's just a shame. If you need more evidence that Alpha Omega was somewhat rushed, look no further than the Easter egg ending cutscene, which I don't even have to explain to you guys. It's pretty much just like a PowerPoint presentation compared to the like CGI fully rendered cutscenes we were used to in BO3. It's very obvious Zombies budget got cut at this point, and they had to make do with what they had, so fair enough. But Alpha Omega, not one of my favorite maps, but it's alright. So next up is Voyage of Despair, and I've got some words to say about this one. Now, when I was at the Black Ops 4 reveal event and they showed off Voyage of Despair to the world for the first time, I was one of those people. I thought Voyage was going to be literally like Shadows of Evil 2.0. I thought it was going to be the second coming of Christ as a zombies map. I was one of those people that genuinely thought this would overtake everything else prior to it as being the greatest zombies experience of all time. But boy, was I wrong. It's unfortunate. I wanted to like this map so bad. I really did, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Voyage of Despair's fatal flaws are numerous, and some of them aren't so obvious, but the general idea is that this was a, as close as you can get, one-to-one recreation of the actual Titanic in real life, ported as a zombies map, and they put, I'm sure, an unbelievable amount of effort into making this map as realistic as it can be, and I'm going to give them credit for that, absolutely, for sure. The problem is, this goes goes to show that a lot of the times one-to-one realism just doesn't make for the best gameplay experiences. And it's so unfortunate because Voyage of Despair actually has one of the best Treyarch boss fights of all time. I would put it up there with the likes of Legion on Cold War Zombies, also BO3 Gorod Krovi. It's a genuinely great boss fight, and I would play it again over and over if I could, but it has one of the worst Easter egg quests in all of Zombies, and especially for solo players, it's unbearable. It's pretty much the most homework-heavy quest you'll ever have, I guess, besides Dead of the Night, and again, a lot of the puzzles I have no problem with on paper. It's the fact that zombies exist while you're trying to do them. If you have somebody to watch the zombie, if you're playing co-op, it actually isn't as bad as I'm probably making it seem, but if you're primarily a solo player, trying to do these puzzles with zombies in the map and trying not to end the round, it makes you actually want to go to the retirement home early. And similar to Dead of the Night, but to a way lesser extent, I think they got a little bit too ahead of themselves with these Easter egg quests and putting their focus on that they fell out of touch with being a zombies map. And if you guys didn't know, when Black Ops 4 was first being developed, their original idea was to make this game not even have rounds, and it was just pretty much going to be a constant flow of zombies, more or less, as you're doing quest steps. And again, on paper, I would be fine with that, and it sounds like a good idea, but the execution was horribly flubbed. And it's just so frustrating and annoying because it has genuinely one of the most amazing zombies boss fights, but unfortunately, it's gatekeeped by one of the most unpleasant Easter egg zombies quests of all time. So next up, we have Zetsubou No Shima, which is our first Black Ops 3 map to appear on the list so far. Now, aside from all of the, issues with the map on launch, a lot of people remember the glitches and problems that it had. I'm putting all that stuff aside. When you look at the map as it exists right now, and all, technical issues not included, the map itself in its own small bubble isn't too bad. The problem is Zetsubou was surrounded by arguably the two best zombies maps of all time, and it does make it look a little bit more rough. Now, I will say, Zetsubou still isn't a perfect map. It's not, I wouldn't even classify it as a great map. It's got some really neat ideas. I will say, its mini-boss I'm not in love with. The Thrasher, isn't super rewarding as an enemy. It does have a mini-boss fight as, a giant spider, which is fun. Its actual main Easter egg boss fight isn't anything to write home about. In fact, it's probably one of the weaker Treyarch boss fights in general. But Treyarch have gone on record mentioning that Zetsubou, they kind of know was gonna maybe be a little bit more polarizing than something like a Der Eisendrache or another map of that nature. But this map was necessary in sort of laying the technological groundwork for future maps to come. This map was very experimental, obviously, and not all of it worked. I will say it's not unplayable or anything, and it's, can be a quite enjoyable time, but it's not the most, optimized zombies map or even optimized for fun we've ever seen. I remember when this map released, and it was for sure a pretty pronounced low point for the community. A lot of people were very upset with zombies at the time, even though we had literally just gotten two absolute banger maps before then. This one had to, take a dip a little bit, but I remember the community being really upset at this map when it came out. But right now we can sort of look back at it a little bit more retrospectively, and while it's not a top tier map, it's not amazing, it's certainly decent. So coming up next is Blood of the Dead on Black Ops 4, and it's really unfortunate because this single-handedly may have had the most hype built up around it that a zombies map has ever possessed. And you'll remember that at the Black Ops 4 reveal, it's oh, this is a Mob of the Dead remaster with the Primus characters. Literally, what could go wrong? Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't an absolute, sheer disaster of a map. And in fact, there's a lot I quite like. Not only the aesthetic and the atmosphere are absolutely spot on, it's actually got a few of the best Easter egg quest steps of all time. Unfortunately, it's also a mixed bag with some of the worst steps of all time as well. I think the idea with Blood of the Dead more or less was supposed to be what they originally wanted to do with Mob, which was have more of the expanded version of Alcatraz Island. Obviously, Mob of the Dead had to be what it was because they were constrained by the hardware at the time. But even so, with that roadblock in mind, they completely optimized everything about Mob of the Dead in terms of its layout and even its Easter egg quests, which again, we'll talk about Mob a little bit later in the video. But with Blood of the Dead, it seems like a lot of the new areas and additions don't really gel well with what originally made Mob's gameplay loop so fun. I like to describe this map's weaknesses as death by 1,000 paper cuts. There's a million little things about Blood of the Dead that really denigrate the experience, and I'll just name a few. One of them being the fact that the Pack-a-Punch machine teleports to 3 different locations, which on its own isn't a bad thing, but there's no indicator in-game that tells you where the Pack-a-Punch machine is. Similarly to how the mystery box always has a light that tells you where it's currently located, that doesn't exist for the Pack-a-Punch machine. You just have to run around around and guess where it is, and because of the map's really clunky layout, isn't always, the most optimal experience. Also, inside the warden's office, the hole to get into that secret room is only big enough for one player model, so you either collide with the zombie or you collide with a teammate if you're trying to get in and out of there. Very annoying, as it's completely fundamental for doing the main quest. The Easter egg steps range from being very fun and some of the best in Zombies, where you, like, for example, escort a zombie soul through the cafeteria into the other side of the prison so he can escape, while you have the zombies, attacking him all the while. It's great. That is an amazing step. But then you also have a bird that you have to find 3 separate rounds that has 42 spawn locations or something like that. It's absolutely ludicrous. The actual boss fight itself is what I would say mediocre at best in terms of its gameplay. The cutscene, however, is the best in Zombies in my opinion, hands down, but I'm not really, I guess, ranking story and cutscenes, but for what that's worth, it is the best in Zombies in my opinion. Definitely nails the atmosphere, nails the emotion, but to get there, you kind of have to go through some pain, it feels like, and that's, again, a lot of my issues with BO4. Blood of the Dead had some really lofty and, quite frankly, interesting ideas, but much of the execution was just completely fumbled, and it is unfortunate, but it is what it is. So coming up just after that is Firebase Z on Cold War Zombies, and I talked about this way more extensively in my Cold War retrospective, but Firebase Z, I would say, was probably the weakest link out of all the maps that Cold War had to offer. Reason being, it didn't have anything too special that made it stand out from the rest. I think it's extremely generic in terms of its setting and also its layout and its just general gameplay flow. The boss fight itself is incredibly weak, even for Treyarch. And I'm only saying that because compared to other studios, boss fights have never been Treyarch's strong suit, although they're getting much better at it. But Firebase Z was just, it's literally just the order that you encounter in the map already, with more health and stationary. It's not super fun. But I will say those are a lot of the negatives about Firebase Z. There is actually quite a lot to like about this map. The quest itself, while pretty easy and straightforward, is actually quite fun to do, and especially in repeat playthroughs. It's got a lot of replayability, whether you're just shooting zombies, playing for high rounds, or just doing its Easter egg. The map's wonder weapon, the Reiki, is genuinely a ton of fun, and there's a neat little quest that you can do in Firebase Z in order to obtain it. Nothing you have to do in this map is like incredibly annoying where you have to reference guides to get all of the equipment and stuff the map has to offer. It's just that Firebase Z doesn't do anything inherently wrong. It just doesn't do anything spectacular. It's exceptionally mid as a zombies map. Coming up just after that, and speaking of sort of mid, we have Shi No Numa. Now, I am specifically referring to mostly BO1 and World at War Shi No Numa. A few interesting things about this map really quick is the fact that this was the introduction of actual boss zombie rounds for the first time, or mini bosses in the form of hellhounds, which was pretty groundbreaking at the time, and also the addition of the Wunderwaffe as a new staple wonder weapon, which would really set precedents for zombies going forward. Shi No Numa really did a lot right, I think. It's just that upon playing it, whether it's World at War, BO1, or BO3, completely broken on the World at War version, by the way, I just find this map kind of boring, honestly. It needs to be noted as well that this was pretty much the first time that Treyarch really allowed players to open up the playable space and run around and have more room to work with in zombies, because otherwise we were just confined to both Nacht Der Untoten and Verr&uuml in the Asylum. So this is a big step for zombies, and I think it was a necessary one, but in terms of how Shi No Numa is and how it holds up in 2022, I just find it kind of boring personally. Nothing crazy wrong with it or no offensive features or anything like that. It's just, I don't know, not really my thing. It doesn't hold my attention for very long, and I'm sure a lot of you guys can probably relate. I do also remember it being one of my least favorite maps when the map was out as well. I'd rather play Nacht Der Untoten or rather play Verr&uuml, but either way, it is fairly interesting. So up next, we have Classified from Black Ops 4 Zombies. This is a remake of the original map 5 on BO1, and I'm actually ranking this lower than original 5 because to me, Classified has all of the problems that 5 has, but with none of the sauce, and I'll explain what I mean. 5 is an extremely effective map at being chaotic and making you feel like genuinely tense in the early game setup, and honestly most of the gameplay. Classified, not so much. It's the same layout, but with Black Ops 4 systems, especially with gobblegums or elixirs, specialist weapons in particular, a lot of this stuff really deflates a lot of the tension that it had. Not to mention, there's also no Pentagon Thief anymore that would come every few rounds and try to steal your weapons, which was a super unique addition to 5 at the time. And there's also just, I guess, it's the same pack-a-punch setup to get there as it is in original 5, just with a fetch quest involved beforehand, which doesn't really add anything new or interesting to the gameplay, just makes it a bit more artificial if you ask me. But with that in mind, I actually really like classified, all things considered. It's probably the best map on BO4 just to jump in and shoot zombies. If you don't want to worry about setting up a whole bunch of things or looking at YouTube guides to get wonder weapons, you can literally just load this up and start shooting zombies, and it is ideally the best map for that. There is a main Easter egg quest on this map, as well as a small side quest to get the Winter's Howl. The main quest is getting to round 150 to get the cutscene. I'm not kidding. That's literally how you beat classified, and to my knowledge, it takes like 10 to 12 hours to do that on average, so most people couldn't be bothered to even go and do this. I don't know why they didn't just put it at round 100, which is like kind of the milestone that a lot of people go for, but either way, they put the cutscene at round 150. They also lost a lot of the chaoticness that Original 5 had in the way the teleporters work. So when you're down there in the laboratory on Original 5, you're going to get sent to a random location when you go through a teleporter, and in Classified, there's an icon that tells you exactly which floor you're going to end up in, which I guess from a gameplay design standpoint is probably better, but there is something kind of interesting about just not knowing where you're going to go. You can end up in a great situation, you could end up in a terrible situation by using the teleporters on 5, where on Classified it is a bit more calculated, so take that for what it's worth. Besides those, I don't even really have that many criticisms of Classified. In fact, there's a lot that I really do like about the map. I think it plays in Black Ops 4 systems moderately well. It could be a little better, but it's not like a terrible offender. It's not as good as Original 5 in my opinion, but it's serviceable and it really gets the job done. It's got some neat ideas. It's just kind of mid as a remake, I think. Next up, just after that, is Shangri-La on Black Ops 1, and this is a super polarizing map in the community because its difficulty relative to other maps in the game that was featured in Black Ops 1 is either a big turnoff to people or it's something that makes them like the map even more. So it's quite unique and strange in that fact, but the map itself is pretty hard. Whether you're talking about just surviving and shooting zombies and trying to survive high rounds, or if you're attempting to do the Easter egg, which you absolutely need a full team for to do, and even then, it requires probably the most teamwork and communication that a zombies Easter egg has realistically ever required, which again, kind of separates it amongst the pack. Are all of these steps designed super well and all of the like mini boss enemies? Maybe not necessarily. There are some annoyances and fatal flaws that Shang has. The map is literally meant just to choke you out, and it's not even necessarily a flaw. It's in fact very intentional. There's not a whole lot of space to move around, and so you have to get very creative in terms of how you actually maneuver around the map, which is very different to a lot of the Black Ops 1 map designs. So it's something different in that regard. The wonder weapon itself does 0 damage at all. It just makes the zombies small, like baby size, so that you can kick them around, and it's like, you know, that's fun enough. It's a really unique concept for a wonder weapon that does 0 damage, and we haven't really seen much of that in, you know, modern day zombies, where a wonder weapon doesn't exactly kill zombies, but you can set up to do something like that. Again, it's just more of that Jimmy Zielinski weird, like, creative, chaotic brain stuff. I really don't have many bad things to say about Shangri-La at all, honestly. I think it's a very good change of pace for zombies maps that tend to get monotonous and boring. Shangri-La is a good mix-up and will certainly crank up the difficulty on you for at least a little bit, and I think every now and again that's needed. I will say the Zombies Chronicles remake of Shangri-La is absolutely gorgeous visually, and from a gameplay perspective, still holds pretty true to what made Shangri-La addicting and iconic to begin with. So I really like both versions, and I guess it depends on what kind of mood I am in to determine which one I'll play, but Shangri-La, actually a pretty decent map in my opinion. Coming up just after that, I'm going to give this to Verr&uuml, and I really think that both the World at War, Black Ops 1, and BO3 version hold up extremely well. Verr&uuml was iconic for a couple of reasons. Number one being the introduction of the concept of perks to zombies, which, you know, originally were just Quick Revive, Juggernog, Double Tap, and Speed Cola. Also, traps were first introduced on this map, and also World at War was hailed as one of the most difficult maps, not only because of Verr&uuml having a very tight layout, but also the super sprinters that appeared on the World at War version are faster than the player, and they're absolutely insane. I really think that what Verr&uuml does is take Nacht Der Untoten's gameplay loop and just improve on it. Literally, I would just say that Verr&uuml is straight up a better designed version of Nacht Der Untoten. You still have the incredibly tight spaces that make for a lot of like tension in your gameplay, but you have a few new things to get creative with, such as, again, perks and traps and things of that nature. Still no real wonder weapons besides the ray gun, at least on the World at War version. The BO1 build of Nacht has the Winter's Howl, which is kind of pathetic as a wonder weapon. It's not really that great on the map, but there are a lot of strategies that are super fun to run on Verr&uuml, and it's still regarded as one of, if not the hardest map in Zombies, according to a lot of people. When Verr&uuml released, I think Treyarch was literally just trying to hone in on one particular gameplay loop and attempting to improve on that with each map, and I really think it's just a massive jump in quality between Nacht Der Untoten and Verr&uuml. They really got their act together in that, and then as the World at War DLC season went on, they generally improved the quality of their maps. Again, I really think that Verr&uuml is still better than Shi No Numa in my opinion, but not only did they take Verr&uuml and improve on the formula and add new things, they, in that general direction, they trended upwards, and Verr&uuml is just a really good example of like finding a formula and making it better. So big fan of this map. Next up, we have the absolutely iconic Black Ops 1 map, Ascension, and I feel like if you ask a lot of like, you know, more casual fans of Zombies what some of their favorite maps are, I would probably bet that Ascension is at least one of them. It's very memorable to many people who played Zombies back in the day, and for a lot of reasons. It's a really unique location, and it also has the first ever like main Easter egg that Zombies ever had, really. In terms of difficulty, it's certainly one of the easier maps in Zombies, as there's like vast swaths of wide open space that you can utilize, and the fact that there's so many like wonder weapons and like the Matryoshka dolls, the Gersh device, thunder gun, stuff like that to help keep you alive. That being said, it isn't like a walk in the park as a map, and there's quite a lot you have to do in order to set up, but the Easter egg itself is also pretty interesting. It's not overly complicated, but it's a little something to do if you want to explore a bit further. I have some of my best memories playing with friends on this map and, you know, spending countless hours playing Ascension, but I don't think it has one of the most like ingenious map designs of all time, but in terms of being one of the first DLC for BO1, it's pretty good, all things considered. The one fatal flaw, the weak link in Ascension, however, comes in the form of its special rounds, and these are monkeys that are really tiny that fall from the sky and steal your perks. This isn't so bad in co-op, which is fundamentally how Ascension was designed. You know, it was designed for 4 people to be playing this map at once, and you can have everybody defending a perk. In solo, it's significantly more annoying to defend all of them, and in Zombies Chronicles, the Black Ops 3 remake, really there isn't a whole lot you can do exactly to fend them off solo besides using like a nuke gobblegum or whatever, but in BO1, they're incredibly frustrating, and so I'd say besides the monkeys, Ascension is nearly like a cutout map. I also feel like Ascension became the blueprint in which a lot of maps were modeled after, you know, in the coming years for Zombies, having, you know, a new wonder weapon, a new perk, and a main Easter egg. They would really follow that format as time goes on. Coming up next, we have Forsaken, which is DLC 4 in Black Ops Cold War, and generally I like a lot of the Cold War maps, and this being the final real DLC send-off for this game, it was very strange. So this map takes place in basically the red light, green light mission of the campaign, although it's, you know, significantly more extended. It's got some interesting ideas with its wonder weapon, and its boss fight is actually pretty good. Its main quest is decent. It's very short. The problem is the map layout is honestly really bad. And the thing is, Treyarch usually has at least moderately decent or passable layouts for their Zombies maps, but for some reason, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was time constraint. Maybe it was like just a design thing. I'm not sure, but the layout of Forsaken is generally what I would consider bad. There's big chunks of the map that are all like crucial, but they are severely disconnected from one another, and within some of those like subsections, there's rooms that again serve like no purpose. It's sort of like diarized in that way, where there's just areas of the map that serve no purpose to even play in or have anything like Easter egg related. I will say Forsaken does have the best side Easter eggs in all of Cold War. They really found their footing with that as the season went on, and especially in the arcade, there's some really neat stuff you can do. Side quests are great. Main quest was a little on the weak side, but the boss fight was pretty good. It's decent. If this map did not have a strong boss fight, and it also didn't have the really fun side Easter eggs, I would actually rank this map lower than Firebase Z when it comes to Cold War, but because of those two factors, I actually think it's at least a step up in that regard. Forsaken may not have been the like ideal ending to Cold War, but it's basically setting up for the continuation of the story in supposedly Treyarch's next game. But all in all, Forsaken has some neat ideas. It's just the map layout is almost unbearable. So other than that, it's okay. It's still a pretty mid-tier map, all things considered, and it's truly middle of the pack in my opinion. So coming up next is what, despite what Chaos X Silencer might want to have you believe, is indeed not the best Zombies map of all time. Kino Der Toten Black Ops 1. But basically, yeah, this map is, I actually think it's a true, like, mid-tier map. I think it's really good as an on-disc map, and perhaps the best map to onboard new players into the concept of zombies. Now, as a lot of you guys know, originally, Kino Der Toten was meant to be a DLC for World at War, but because of scheduling and how the games were going to be released, they had to make this the on-disc map for Black Ops 1, and you can tell the difference in the way that Kino Der Toten plays versus every other BO1 map that came after it. They're just fundamentally designed different, but that's okay. I think Kino is simple enough, and people remember it for a reason. A lot of people, it's their first ever zombies experience, and it's going to be remembered that way. And again, it has all of the basics in play. You can learn how to use wonder weapons, you learn how to turn on the power and do little small things to get the pack-a-punch, and it can be played in a variety of ways in terms of high rounds. You can train on the stage, or you can do like fire trap strats. There's a lot of ways you can play Kino, and it's very palatable for anybody. And if we're basing this off of pure like enjoyment or fun you might get out of it, I actually think a lot of people probably had the most fun in zombies on Kino Der Toten. I had an absolute ton of fun playing this map, and still do in a lot of ways. But in terms of just like its design, it doesn't do anything crazy that like a World at War map didn't already do. And for that, it just doesn't bring anything too special to the table other than being the onboarding map for a lot of players. I think I would go so far as to say that Kino Der Toten actually is the most palatable zombies map ever, and is probably the best on-disc map in terms of players getting them like introduced to the mechanics. It's not overwhelming like Shadows of Evil was for a lot of people on BO3. It's not Transit and that absolute nightmare if that was your first zombies experience on BO2. I doubt BO4 like Blood of the Dead or Voyage of Despair was very good at onboarding anybody at all, and so you kind of get what I'm saying. Like, Kino Der Toten's great, it's very iconic, but it's the best map at getting people into the game, and that's about it. So coming up next on our list is actually the map that comes directly after Kino Der Toten anyways. This is 5, or I guess the unremastered version of Classified. This is the original build, and in my opinion, the way that canonically this map should be played in terms of its like actual experience and the way that it was intended. The differences between 5 and Classified are a few. Number one being the teleporters being random in here, which adds a lot of the like chaotic element to the map that it desperately needs. But when you think about it, 5 kind of works with the same skeleton and structure that Kino Der Toten has. It's just rearranged in a slightly more specialized and difficult way. You have a few more added elements like having to build traps, you have the Pentagon Thief to contend with, and also the random teleporters, stuff like that that will make the map somewhat less palatable for the average zombies player, and this is why a lot of people don't like 5. They find it a little bit more oppressive than Kino, and I think just having the two maps exist next to one another is a really good thing. You have the map just to go on and shoot zombies and chill on, Kino Der Toten, and then you have something that can crank the heat up a little bit more without being too, you know, annoying, and that being 5. I don't think 5's a great introductory map in all honesty, although you can unlock it on Black Ops 1, and it's probably one of the first maps you're going to encounter if you're a brand new zombies player on BO1. I know it was for me. If it's not Kino, it's probably going to be 5. So not great for onboarding new players, but is a really good challenge even if you've been playing zombies for years, and I quite enjoy 5 even to this day. Next up is a map that kind of has the opposite problem of Transit for me, where like objectively on paper, 9 is a really well designed map on BO4. It's a pretty good on disc map for onboarding people, fairly simple and straightforward layout. The map makes sense, the Easter egg is pretty good, and the boss fight's actually what I would consider to be great, but I don't know what it is, but I just wasn't able ever to fall in love with this map, and I don't know if I'm in the minority here, there's other people that agree. I just wasn't able to really get into 9. I don't know what it is exactly, whether it's the setting or the atmosphere not really doing it for me. I do know that, you know, honestly, I like pretty much most of Jason Blundell's maps, and that's why a lot of his BO3 ones and other stuff haven't even been talked about yet, and from what I understand, 9 is the map on BO4 that Jason Blundell had the least to do creatively with. So the more I think about it, that might be an explanation as to why this map just didn't really like, it didn't hit that same groove that especially we were all used to coming after BO3. A lot of the BO4 maps that Jason Blundell did have a lot to do with, at least you can tell that it had his style sort of imprinted on it, but I never really felt that with 9, and perhaps that's the reason. Again, nothing really inherently wrong or to complain about with 9. If I'm ranking it just based on its like mechanics and design, it's, I would say, pretty high tier, or at least middle of the pack. If I'm ranking it based on how much fun I've had with the map, honestly, it would be in my lower tier of maps. Anyways, next, I'm kind of putting this off in its own bracket. This is Outbreak on Cold War. I'm not comparing this to like a direct 1-to-1 BO1 to any round-based map, because you can't really compare Outbreak to round-based maps as they serve entirely different functions. But I did want to mention this entire mode as it was a very big part of Cold War's structure as an entire game. And I would go so far as to say that Outbreak is a generally very good game mode. While it's not perfect, and I definitely took it apart a lot more in my Cold War retrospective, Outbreak brought a lot to the table, and it's certainly the biggest risk they took in Cold War, or at least I would say the biggest risk that Treyarch took in recent years that really paid off. They brought onboarded a ton of new players to the game that were previously maybe introduced through Warzone or maybe even multiplayer, and brought them into more of the Zombies experience. Now, where Outbreak falls apart a little bit is that a lot of the maps themselves aren't really Zombies maps. They're, again, reused MP maps or fire team maps, whatever. But the mode as a whole, and especially a lot of the Easter eggs and boss fights that it can bring, they really show the potential for where the game could go and what the second draft of this Outbreak mode could be. Again, I just happen to be throwing Outbreak right here in the video, but in terms of like its ranking, it's sort of off in its own bracket. It's doing its own thing. I don't like to compare this to round-based maps because they're not at all the same, and they shouldn't be. But I thoroughly enjoy Outbreak, and I really hope they continue and expand on the formula that they brought in Cold War. It's a great game mode, and I know a lot of you guys seem to like it as well. But coming up next, we have Moon on Black Ops 1. This does have a BO3 iteration on Chronicles as well, and at least visually on Chronicles, it looks completely different. The map looks way better in the remastered version. That is to say, though, that the gameplay of the Black Ops 1 version of Moon is still pretty good. Like, it definitely holds up. I will say it's probably one of the easier maps in Black Ops 1, and they really started to toy around with like overpowered wonder weapons, especially as the season went on. And as some of you may know, but some of you may not, DLC 4 for BO1 was actually supposed to be a map that takes place in Paris, but Jimmy Zielinski wanted something that was a bit more grand in scope, and so how do you get more grand than literally going to the moon and blowing up Earth? Pretty good as a finale for BO1, and it certainly set up the events of Black Ops 2 quite nicely. I will say, though, Moon has a lot of problems with its design. Map layout is probably one of the worst in Zombies. Forsaken's certainly worse, but Moon's pretty bad. Moon has also maybe one of the worst mini-bosses of all time, the slow astronaut that, you know, kind of sneaks around the map. If it grabs you, it's probably going to take a perk, and there isn't a whole lot you can do to get out of it, but unfortunately, it's constantly respawning, and it doesn't have very much of an indicator that it's around. Like, you can hear a little radio chatting, but that's really about it, and it also doesn't give you any drops for taking it out either. It's pretty much a mini-boss that exists only to annoy you. Way more manageable to deal with in the Black Ops 3 Chronicles versions of the map, but yeah, in BO1, it's sort of not really it. The main Easter egg is pretty fun in Moon, although it's very heavily related to your RNG. You have to get certain excavators to come down at a certain time. You need a bunch of things out of the mystery box, and which, if you're playing solo, requires you to trade them in and out, so you're not even guaranteed to be able to do it. Just, you have to get a really lucky game. If you're doing it co-op, it isn't as bad, but the Easter egg itself is really not cut out for solo players, although technically at least half of it is possible. So I have this theory that DLC 4 for every Zombies game, I would say this is true up until Black Ops 4, the DLC 4 map is usually the blueprints for how the next game's formula is going to be designed. So in this case, Moon was basically the blueprints of a Black Ops 2 map, and where Origins is kind of the blueprints of a BO3 map. I'll explain that later. Moon, at this point, essentially started to find its footing with main Easter egg quests, and Jimmy Zielinski started getting really comfortable with what makes a Zombies quest fun. Also with Moon, the majority of the Zombies community didn't even really know about Easter eggs, I would say, until Moon, when they became significantly more mainstream. Everyone wanted to see the ending of Moon, and by that point, everybody more or less expected some kind of main Easter egg, you could call it that, to be in a Zombies map going forward, and obviously they would do that with Tranzit and every BO2 map, but Moon really, I would say, established the idea of Easter eggs in the mainstream heart of Zombies fans. And despite all of the other flaws that Moon has, maybe in terms of its map layout or just other design choices, you at least got to give it credit for bringing the idea of Easter eggs to the mainstream of Zombies. But just after that is going to be the on-disc map for Cold War, The Maschine. It's one of my personal favorites, although I don't think it's like the best designed map ever in Zombies. We've certainly seen a little bit better. I would still say it's pretty high tier, though. It does make sense in terms of getting players onboarded to this game in particular, as its Easter egg, its main quest, isn't really too difficult at all, and high rounds are pretty accessible to new players, which again is more of just a Cold War thing. If you want a better in-depth review of this map in particular, I would watch my Cold War retrospective, but suffice to say, The Maschine Maschine really did what it needed to do for Cold War Zombies, which was get players familiar with the game. I don't have a whole lot to say about Maschine already that I haven't already mentioned. I just think it's all around a very well-rounded map. There isn't a whole lot of fatal flaws to it at all. I would say maybe it's lacking in the like side quest Easter egg department. There isn't a whole lot to do outside of the main quest, but that's really about it. If this was packed with a little bit more like side events to encounter, then perhaps it would be one of the best Zombies maps of all time. But it is very solid from a design point nonetheless, and I actually think it's one of the better ones. But moving on after that, we have Nuketown Zombies, which may be a little bit controversial to put this high on the list, but I really like this map, and it's for sure a lot has to do with my personal taste and my proclivity to enjoy these kinds of maps. But Nuketown, and I think the charm of why it works in BO2 as opposed to something like Alpha Omega, is they really didn't try to overthink this map. The essence of Nuketown, I'm talking in multiplayer, is just literally like pure unadulterated chaos, and that's pretty much what it is in the form of BO2 and Zombies as well. The map is hard on BO2, there's no doubt about that, and it also has a system in which perks come into the map in a random fashion, so you can be at round 20 if you get really unlucky without Juggernog the whole time. It's a very good map to practice on. I would say like the fundamentals of just learning Zombies. A lot harder to do so than on something like Kino. You've got to be at least somewhat familiar with the game to have a good time on, and I would actually say it's probably better played solo. As 4-player co-op, there just isn't enough room for everybody to have a reasonable amount of space in order to be comfortable in Nuketown, but I guess that's kind of the point, is to be perpetually uncomfortable on Nuketown. But I don't know, it doesn't feel the need to overcomplicate itself with any main Easter egg, although at round 25, the zombies' eyes change from yellow to blue, as the events of Moon canonically in the storyline are taking place at the same time, which is a neat little touch. But just the overall gameplay, it doesn't need to be overcomplicated, and I really think that is fundamentally the charm of this version as compared to Alpha Omega, which I think just overthought Nuketown. I would think about it like this: Town is to Kino Der Toten as Nuketown is to 5, and it's basically just the idea that it has the same structure as just a basic survival map, with the bones rearranged a little bit to make the heat slightly more intense and the map slightly more difficult. But I'm a really big fan of Nuketown, and I think it's a great experience overall. So coming up next, we have the Giants on Black Ops 3, and this map plays significantly different from Der on the, the original build of it, but it also plays very differently to every other Black Ops 3 map, which was a great thing, because when BO3 launched at the time, the only choices you had were Shadows of Evil or the Giants, and a lot of people at the time were complaining that Shadows of Evil was too complicated, the setup wasn't, they just wanted to jump in and shoot zombies, and that's exactly what the Giant was for. Not only that, but when you look at the map now, this map takes away two of arguably the biggest crutches that BO3 Zombies provides, that being the Zombie Shield and also Widow's Wine. And that may not seem like a whole lot on the surface, and I don't even know if Treyarch intentionally meant it for it to play out like this or not, but it makes the Giant play meaningfully different to every other BO3 map, including Shadows, including things like Der Eisendrache. The Giant is very unique in the fashion that it plays, and I think BO3 would be a lesser game without it. It's one of the most underappreciated maps in the entire game. Not only that, but you can play the Giant very similar to how you played Der back in the day. You can camp on the catwalk, you can train near Pack-a-Punch, and many of the features that you know and love from that map still exist in here, alongside some new stuff. There's a small little Easter egg to do to get the Annihilator, which is basically the same quest that you did in World at War with the, Find Samantha one. There's an Easter egg to unlock a free perk using monkey bombs and teleporters, just some little things here and there that make the map feel, verifiably different from original Der and also other BO3 maps. I think the Giant is an amazing map. Next, however, we have Revelations, and while this is pretty high on my list, and I think Revelations, all things considered, is actually a great map, there are a few things in which I don't particularly like about it. And remember my theory I was saying where the DLC 4 map of every Zombies game is practically more or less the blueprints of the next Zombies iteration. That was true up until BO4, I would say, but Revelations, in my opinion, is essentially the blueprints of a Black Ops 4 map, and I'll explain why. At least in terms of how the player interacts with it, you essentially have the more fetch questy kind of main Easter egg, where Revelations took over 2 weeks to solve. And not only that, but in terms of the wonder weapons and making the player overpowered, kind of like how you have in BO4, you have access to Thundergun, Apothicon Servant, Shield, Lil Arnie's, Ragnaroks, and not even to mention the God Mask. I could go on, but pretty much this is to say that there's a lot that makes the player quite overpowered in Revelations, so I'm not really saying on its face value is a bad thing, but it does make high rounds really easy in Revelations. I'd say it's probably the easiest map, or one of them, to get around 100 of all time. The Easter egg itself is interesting, I guess. Like, the steps are kind of weird. They just involve you gathering a lot of, fetch quest things, very similar to how BO4 functioned. Technically, it has 2 boss fights, I guess, one of them being where you just fight Margwas in 4 sequences, which ironically is actually cooler than the final main boss fight against the Shadow Man, which may be intentional, maybe not, according to Jason. I don't really know. I will say it was nice to see a lot of these classic zombie map iterations be remastered for Revelations, but other than that, there isn't a whole lot of actual new map that was designed. Besides the boss fight arena in Spawn, there are pretty much areas of maps we've already seen before, and again, it might sound like I'm dogging on Revelations quite a lot. There is a lot of flaws to point out, but I really don't hate the map. I think it's actually pretty good. It's just not the strongest in BO3, and the ending, to say the least, was quite weird, so I don't know. Revelations is great, don't get me wrong, but not my favorite. Coming up just after that is what I'm considering to, from this point on, be in our high tier, our true high tier of maps. This is going to be Buried on Black Ops 2, which, speaking of Revelations, in a lot of ways, I would actually say Buried is the Revelations of BO2, in the sense that, you kind of just play this map with anything and everything. This is the epitome of Jimmy Zielinski having absolutely no structure to his zombies maps, and just being a complete, in this case, sometimes a literal sandbox. Like I was saying a bit earlier, it was so smart having both Jason Blundell maps and Jimmy Zielinski maps in the same game, where Jason Blundell's maps are very structured and orderly, Jimmy Zielinski's are very chaotic and unstructured, and you see that no better than in Buried. And something else I noticed, especially with these kinds of maps as opposed to Jason's maps, we know roughly how all the Easter egg steps work. We can explain them pretty much verbatim in Jason maps, but in things like Die Rise, specifically Transit and Buried, a lot of the steps and the way that they function are so enigmatic, you can't really pin them down. So doing the main quest in Buried, for example, if you're doing the steps with the maze and the levers on it, a lot of people thought, oh, the way the levers work, you have to look at the colors of the candy in the shop. It's like complete urban legends and myths that nobody really knows if they're true or not, and that's literally the essence of what Jimmy Zielinski was able to capture. The biggest criticism I hear from the community in regards to Buried is the fact that the map is too easy, and I would actually agree with that in the sense that Revelations on BO3 is too easy. They're, basically cut from the same cloth in terms of design, but Buried is at least an incredibly unique setting, and in a game where it's juxtaposed with very structured and orderly maps. Buried introduced so many weird concepts as well, like Leroy or Arthur the Giant, a lot of the witches that, are in the haunted house that take your points, and even the maze that randomizes every time you go through to get to Pack-a-Punch. So many just weird and strange ideas that, admittedly, not all of them landed, and there is a lot about Buried that just doesn't make sense, or there's a lot of wasted space, or there's just some things that straight up probably don't belong in the game, but that's okay. It's a lot of the growing pains of, what zombies had to go through. But I think Buried holds a special place in a lot of people's hearts for many reasons, and not only due to the fact that it was Jimmy Zielinski's final map, but also the fact that, Buried just kind of is the epitome of a sandbox full of toys where it's literally just figure it out. There's no way in which the game tells you this is the best way to play, or it doesn't guide you in any direction. It just gives you the materials and says have fun with it. And there's something kind of charming about that. Again, we haven't really had that in Zombies recently, and who knows if we'll ever see that sort of structure and style again, but I guess only time will tell. Coming up just after that, we have Ancient Evil on BO4, which is easily my favorite on the entire game, and it's not because I particularly like the Chaos Crew. I just think that the entire gameplay loop of Ancient Evil, the Easter egg, and also the boss fight, BO4 systems were just fundamentally made for this map, or I guess this map was made for BO4 systems. A lot of things like, Blood of the Dead, Classified, man, maybe even Dead of the Night, and some of those other experiences, Nacht Der Toten, Alpha Omega, anything else on BO4, it feels like the systems were retrofitted to those maps, where it feels like these systems in which BO4 functions on, like specialists and elixirs, all that stuff, was made for this map in mind. It fits like a glove, and I think that's why the gameplay is so seamless and I enjoy it so much. It's probably the least fetch questy map out of all of the offerings on BO4, which is probably another big reason as to why I enjoy it. That doesn't mean it's easy. A lot of the gameplay challenges in Ancient Evil can actually be quite difficult, and I enjoy it for that fact. The boss fight isn't perfect. I think it's got its, it's got its flaws. You kind of lose space in the boss fight arena over time, which doesn't really add much to the experience for me, and I'm not really in love with the mini-boss enemies of this map either, but as I guess the final Chaos map, this was a pretty good send-off. I know it wasn't supposed to be the last Chaos map, but that's how it ended up being for BO4, and I'm kind of glad we ended on this note, because it's a map that I actually like. Don't particularly enjoy 9 or Dead of the Night all that much, but Ancient Evil, it really gets a pass in my book. It gets a green light for me, and is genuinely a very solid Zombies experience, even for newer players, I would say. Coming up just above that, whereas Ancient Evil is the best map in BO4, I think that Nacht Der Toten is Cold War's best offering. Now, Nacht Der Toten, I actually didn't expect to like all that much before it came out, and we had to wait a long time in between Firebase Z and this map, but it was well worth the wait. Nacht Der Toten not only has just like a great core gameplay loop, its atmosphere is pretty distinct and unique, and it brings a lot of features that we really hadn't seen in Cold War up to this point, especially with the addition of Klaus. It introduced Mule Kick, and also I believe Gersh devices finally made it to the game with this map as well. The main Easter egg is probably one of the best in Zombies in general, and certainly the best in Cold War. The boss fight is pretty stellar as well. You have to fight Valentina in her like ethereal form, and while it isn't the best boss fight in Cold War compared to Legion, it's still absolutely excellent. This was the first map in Cold War as well to have its own unique Pack-a-Punch camo that wasn't the default where the game launched, and they're very pretty in this map, I gotta say, and it's also got a pretty decent amount of offerings for side quests, not as many as Forsaken obviously, but it's got a pretty fair amount of side Easter eggs to discover or just do them for the first time, whether it be like the bunny Easter egg in which you go to the club or getting the ether tool. There's a bunch of them that really add to the experience of Nacht Der Toten. Just a great experience in general, and I don't have that many bad things to say about it. High rounds are pretty fun on it as well, and there isn't a whole lot to complain about with Mauer, honestly. So coming up just after that, we're actually getting close to the end of our map list here, but this is still a pretty high tier map. Call of the Dead. I think this is the favorite map of a lot of people, and I didn't like this for a long time, but as years have gone on, I've started to appreciate the Call of the Dead's design choices a little bit more, and specifically, it really has a distinct flavor, not only in terms of the map aesthetic, the setting and the atmosphere really help, but of course, we have to mention the late, great George Romero plays a very key role in how this map functions as a boss that pretty much always follows you around whether you take him out or not. The main quest is a pretty interesting idea in which turns the general formula on its head, where now you're not playing as Ultimus, you're just assisting them by essentially gathering items and doing little objectives for them as you're in the map and trying to make your way through as well. And I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, this was the first time in Zombies history that we played as a crew that wasn't Ultimus, or I guess the first like real celebrity cast. The map also brought 2 new unique wonder weapons, being the Scavenger explosive sniper rifle and also the VR-11, which turns regular zombies into humans and can also calm George down. So it's got a variety of uses, and it's just like, again, weird and creative wonder weapon formulas that BO1 was very identifiable for. If I were to level some criticisms at Call of the Dead, I would say that there should be a mechanic in which you can take George Romero out once and then choose to spawn him in again, instead of having him follow you around the map at all times, even regardless if you take him out. If you do the Easter egg and you grab a death machine, you'll be given a Wonder Waff instead of a typical death machine. So that's, I guess, a pretty cool, like, permanent perk for doing that sort of thing. The Easter egg can be done solo or co-op, and they have slightly different variations on the steps, although both of them aren't too difficult to do. They're rather fun. I feel like at the end of the day, Call of the Dead is quite literally just the amalgamation and the concentration of, like, the essence of BO1 Zombies. When I think of Black Ops 1, a lot of times I just think of Call of the Dead. So many other good design choices, great wonder weapons, pretty good layout, all things considered, the first teleporting Pack-a-Punch machine, and just a lot of uniqueness that Call of the Dead has to offer. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find some people that at least wouldn't rank Call of the Dead as a good map. But now entering our top tier, or the greatest of all time tier of maps, this first one is going to be Gorod Krovi in Black Ops 3, and I was making the argument that the systems in Black Ops 4 fit Ancient Evil like a glove. I would make that exact same argument statement about BO3 systems and Gorod Krovi. They just flow so immaculately well together, and it's got probably one of the best actual map layouts of all time, as well as a great Easter egg quest and one of the best boss fights in Zombies history. Not to mention, the map also reintroduced the PPSH back into the pool of Zombies weapons, and the community went absolutely wild for that. And it also introduced a version of the ray gun we had never seen quite like this before, the Mark III, which not only helped this map become more iconic, it really gave it some distinct, unique flavor, but the weapon itself became pretty iconic for Zombies in general. The map also, it takes place in war-torn Stalingrad. That's basically the general atmosphere, but it combines an alternate history in some sense with dragons, and it's a little bit more complicated than that with the zombie storyline and everything and why they exist there. But the Easter egg itself involves you basically doing tasks for Sophia, and this is where I think a lot of the beauty comes in. The way that these tasks and Easter egg steps thereafter are designed are completely genius. They're right on the edge of challenging the player's gameplay skills without really being annoying. A lot of the ways in which you obtain wonder weapons in here don't feel punishing if you don't go after them. It doesn't really denigrate your experience all that much, but they are very rewarding if you choose to go out of your way and get some of these things. Perfect example is the Dragon Strike controller. Once you take the dragon for the first time to the Pack-a-Punch machine, you can choose to do a lockdown for 3 sequences, and you're given this Dragon Strike controller, which is, you know, pretty much a zombie's airstrike for all intents and purposes. It's not necessary at all if you're just shooting zombies and playing the map. It is necessary for the Easter egg, but other than that, it's completely optional. You can do it if you want, but the game doesn't punish you if you don't. If you make it to the boss fight, you fight both a dragon and also Nikolai in a mech suit, which originally you think is going to assist you, but it turns out you actually have to fight him in the end as well. A really well-structured boss fight. It's got its own, like, area for it, and it plays out extremely nicely. If I had to throw some criticism at Gorod Krovi, I would say that its special rounds, the Valkyrie drones, don't really fit into the map all that well. They kind of feel like shoehorned in, but otherwise, they're fine additions. I just don't love them, but Gorod Krovi is a absolutely A-tier, S-tier map. Next up is Der Riese. This is the World at War version, and I would also say by extension, the Black Ops 1 version of original Der Riese. We've seen a couple of iterations of this over the years, but these two in particular are absolutely the best, and the reason is, this is one of those situations where good does correlate to fun. I think that Der Riese's layout is literally the blueprints for how I would say 80% of zombie maps are made, where you have a central hub in which either you spawn in or you spend a lot of your time, with a couple of veering off paths to the left and right side. When you think about it now, that's like how 80% of zombies maps are made these days. Not all of them, but most of them, and that pretty much came from Der Riese. You could say Shi No Numa kind of did that first, but Der Riese did it the best and the most distinctly. And not only that, Der Riese brought a few new things to the table, the biggest and most groundbreaking being the Pack-a-Punch machine, which would fundamentally change zombies forever. The Pack-a-Punch machine is more than just about upgrading your weapon to make it stronger. Although that's a big part of it, it really signals a goal and a milestone of progression for the player. One of the best things and best feelings when playing a zombies map is finally getting to or unlocking Pack-a-Punch, and Der Riese made that very straightforward in a show don't tell manner. You go and explore the map, turn on these portals, and you realize that they have a timer. You eventually intuitively link it back to the main frame, and after doing that for all the sections of the map, which by that point you've now explored them all, you are now granted access to Pack-a-Punch. It feels like a good reward for exploring the map. They did that very intentionally. Like I was saying earlier, my theory in which the DLC format is basically the blueprints of the following game, I would say that Der Riese in a lot of ways is the blueprints slash formula for a Black Ops 1 map, and you can kind of see what I mean, where the basic idea is you explore and open the map and you're awarded with Pack-a-Punch. That's how a lot of BO1 maps are structured, and Der Riese kind of brought that right to the forefront for World at War. And it also has, I wouldn't classify it as a main Easter egg, but it has a real visual Easter egg, which is the Samantha hide-and-seek game, where you shoot this spot outside of the map, and then you see these glowing things fly into the map, and you find them, and you don't really get that much of a real reward, but it's something that, like, if you know about it, certainly enhances your experience of the map, and they were to bring it back in the Giant, that's what awards you the Annihilator. But it's just something that they were starting to play with a lot of these ideas that really define what zombies is, even to this day in 2022. It all started with Der Riese, in my opinion. Not only is it just a greatly designed map, it's incredibly fun, and I've had some of my most memorable and enjoyable zombies experiences either by myself or with friends on this very map. So getting almost to the very top of our list, another greatest of all time, inarguably, is Mob of the Dead. But what is is it exactly that makes Mob of the Dead so good? This is when you take basically Jimmy Zielinski's entire method of making maps and do a complete 180. These maps are extraordinarily structured, and that's not even necessarily a bad thing. The gameplay loop is so tightly crafted that you can play the early game and setting up Mob of the Dead in a variety of ways that are all challenging and satisfying. Not only the fact that it takes place in a really unique location on Alcatraz Island and based off of real events, that stuff all tremendously helps, but the gameplay itself is super fun. The fun thing with Mob is that there is a lot of structure, but there's so much variation within that structure. There's still no number one, like a correct way to play the game. Ultimately, if you do the Easter egg, you're going to end up at the same place no matter what, and it doesn't even have a traditional boss fight. You have to face off co-op against one of your friends, and that's a really unique twist on the formula, and we haven't really seen much of that in Zombies either. Mob of the Dead was really ahead of its time in that case. The wonder weapons of the map are all super unique as well. You have the ability to just have the Blundergat, you can upgrade it, or you can make it the Acid Gat as well, and they all have pretty different functions. You can even get the Hell's Retriever and upgrade it to the Hell's Redeemer if you choose so, but again, the difference is you're not punished if you don't. It's completely optional, and your experience isn't tempered either way. This map also gets slightly experimental in getting rid of Quick Revive for the first time in any Zombies map for a new mechanic called Afterlife, which essentially in solo gives you 3 Quick Revives because the map's difficulty is scaled to match as such. This is one of the harder maps in BO2, at least for a lot of people, and it goes to justify that why they would take Quick Revive out and replace it with Afterlife, which you get a new one each round, but is fundamentally there for opening up and interacting with the map in very interesting ways. If I had to lay some criticisms at Mob of the Dead, which again, it is a great, amazing, fantastic map, however, it's not perfect, my criticisms would come in the form that the main Easter egg itself isn't really that substantive in terms of its steps. Really, the Easter egg is build the plane for the first time, go on it 3 more times, get the Acid Gat, get the Golden Spork, and then type in codes, and then go to the bridge. That's pretty much it. Obviously, easier said than done, but there isn't a whole lot of steps outside of that stuff. It's pretty, like, minimal in terms of the steps that are required, but they're all pretty fun to do, so I won't be too hard on that. Brutus as well, who is the mini-boss in Mob of the Dead, is probably also COD Zombies, one of the best mini-bosses that the entire franchise has ever seen. Makes a great debut in Mob of the Dead, and we were going to see him also in Blood of the Dead, but he works extraordinarily well in BO2. It's crazy because Mob of the Dead was also held back by hardware limitations. They wanted to do more with this map, but to be honest, I mean, I guess we'll never know. I feel like Mob of the Dead was actually made better by the fact that they were limited by their hardware, whereas Transit was made a little bit worse. They completely optimized everything they were given with for Mob of the Dead. There's not an inch of wasted space on this map, and everything is very intentional. It is a beautiful masterpiece of a map, and obviously, I don't think many people would disagree with that. So coming up after that is, I don't know, if there was ever a perfect Zombies map, if there was ever an ideal Zombies map that doesn't have any flaws, I think the closest you could get to it is Der Eisendrache. I literally sat here and thought about how I'm going to criticize this map, and I really can't find any holes in this experience. Der Eisendrache is quite literally the perfection of the modern Zombies formula, whereas Der Riese definitely set the precedent. Der Eisendrache is the sheer refinement and perfection of that formula. It follows the same 4 wonder weapon format that we've gotten very used to, but all of the bows have their own unique quests to both obtain and upgrade them, and they all serve their own individual functions. The Easter egg itself has really well thought out and unique steps to do that both include the bows, which was one of my criticisms of Origins, which we'll get to, but the Easter egg quest itself has literally the perfect blend of puzzle steps and gameplay challenges, and it blends it so seamlessly into both getting and obtaining and upgrading the wonder weapons that you don't even really calculate or notice that you're doing the entire Easter egg. But once you do that, you get to the boss fight, and it's a, very straightforward 3-phase shoot the boss kind of damage deal thing. But and I'm not even saying that as a criticism. It's very formulaic, it's straightforward, but it does it very effectively. If I had to criticize DE, that's the only thing I can say, is that it does have a very vanilla and straightforward formula, but it executes it flawlessly. Der Eisendrache was also probably a best case scenario for Black Ops 3 when it released, because starting out the DLC season with this much of a banger for a map, then you're pretty much setting yourself up for, a good year to come, and DE absolutely set the tone for the rest of the season. Easily one of the best Zombies maps of all time, if not the best to a lot of people, but for me, it's not the #1. So let's talk about Origins. This is the next map coming up just after DE, and I think that this map is best played on BO2, and that's the way that it was originally intended to be experienced, whereas Der Eisendrache is basically the Origins format, but perfected. This took more risks, and I would say the risks paid off more in Origins, but that means Origins came with a few more errors and flaws inherently designed into the map, and I'll explain what I mean. So obviously, Origins was the first map to really introduce the formula of having 4 wonder weapons or 4 upgradable unique wonder weapons for your zombies map, and DE obviously sort of copy-pasted that into their format as well. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but Origins did come up with this idea first. And all things considered, I think most people, myself included, still prefer the staves to the bows. Like, the bows are fine and everything, but the staves are absolutely so iconic. And I think these staves function better from a gameplay perspective, and also the way you upgrade them, I just think is maybe a little bit better than how Der Eisendrache does them, although they're very close. The problem with Origins is that the Easter egg itself, the main quest, is basically just getting and upgrading the staves. There's not really many steps outside of that process, whereas with DE, you upgrade the bows and you use, if you're playing solo, just one bow to assist you in doing more steps, where it's like, if you upgrade the staves in Origins, you've done about 90% of the Easter egg already, which kind of makes it feel flat a little bit, but the entire process of getting and upgrading them is the bulk of the quest, and, you know, it's fundamentally designed for 4 players. If you're playing Origins solo, you still have to do all 4 staves, whereas DE, you only have to do one bow. They wanted to mitigate this problem. There's also all sorts of issues with RNG and getting the right robots on Origins, which can be an entire discussion on its own. The layout in terms of how you get around the map isn't perfect in Origins, and in fact, I think stamina up is absolutely required, and I think the zombie shield was pretty much made specifically for this map. Like, I know it's not the first time it appeared, but in terms of running away from zombies in the mud and being slightly slowed down so they might hit you in the back, this is quite literally what the shield was made for. And in this sense, I think the shield is superior to having armor, but in modern zombies, I think the armor system's actually better. That aside, I was thinking about Origins, and you guys can tell me if this is maybe thinking too deep into it, but I was thinking about how Origins is pretty much like a representation of what zombies is. So for example, the upper portions of Origins is obviously the battlefields of World War I. It's dark, it's gray, it's dreary, it's monotonous, and it represents like the, I guess, fundamental surface structure of zombies gameplay, just surviving, rebuilding barriers, and shooting zombies. But then you have the Undercroft. You have this like really mystical and magical place that kind of represents the hidden layer under some zombies maps, right? It almost represents Easter eggs themselves, like diving a little bit deeper into the game to discover something absolutely mind-blowing. And I feel like that's what the 2 layers of Origins, in a sense, kind of visually represent. Maybe I'm looking way too far into it, but that's always how I've thought about it. Basically, just the monotonous surface level gameplay itself of zombies, but you have this hidden layer of more interesting detail and depth hidden underneath. I don't know. You guys can let me know if you think I'm making too much out of that, but that's what I feel like helps make Origins special, whether we consciously think about it like that or not. And you would be really hard-pressed to find somebody who says they genuinely don't like Origins and have some actual reasons for doing so, not just to be a contrarian. The map is widely beloved by the entire zombies community as one of the best, if not the best map of all time, but in my opinion, it still falls short to one map in particular, and ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, this is going to be the best zombies map of all time. This has to be the king, the absolute beauty of the pack, Shadows of Evil in Black Ops 3, and I remember quite vividly, myself a little bit included, but a lot of the community didn't take too well to Shadows of Evil when it came out, and I like to use the analogy that, like, a lot of people say, oh, Shadows of Evil aged really well. I don't think it's that exactly, although maybe it's part of it. I think that we aged into Shadows of Evil. I think as a community and as zombies players, we weren't really ready for this kind of map, but as we got more familiar with not only the mechanics of Black Ops 3 and the maps that were to come subsequently after, and just getting more familiar with it in general, we came to really appreciate what this map actual intent was. And I think Pat said it best when he said, Shadows of Evil is essentially Treyarch's Mona Lisa. You can tell at every level of detail, from the gameplay to the way the structure is set up. I think that Mob of the Dead structure is like the Mob of the Dead format, but perfected. It's that same really tight gameplay loop when setting up your game, but so much variation and freedom opens up to you after you've done that, and there's a variety of ways you can go about setting up. It's absolutely beautiful. You can tell, again, at every level of analysis, how much care and time was put into every inch of Shadows of Evil. Not an inch of wasted space on this map, and in fact, if you look hard enough, every time you play Shadows of Evil, you'll find something new that you didn't notice in the map every time you load it up, and I've been saying that for years. I didn't even really understand understand what I meant by that, but I was like, I get something out of Shadows of Evil, something different each and every time I play it, and that is the mark of a truly well-designed zombies map. The Easter egg steps are also very good, where in terms of getting the wonder weapons and some of the specialists, like, they're completely optional. Again, the game doesn't punish you for not doing it, but if you choose to keep going further and further, eventually you're going to discover how to do the main quest, and you can do up to the Shadow Man boss fight solo, which I will say, if any criticism of Shadows of Evil, the boss fight isn't great, but it's honestly not that bad, and the ending step can be only done with a couple of players. You have to do it co-op, but that's how to get the cutscene. Other than that, those two parts of the quest of Shadows of Evil really help carry this home. The map has such an intriguing backstory and history. I'm not even talking about the literal story of the map. I'm talking about how the map was developed. For example, there was going to be a 5th district in Shadows of Evil that was cut. We may never know much about that at all. We don't really understand why the ability to upgrade the Apothecant Servant was cut, but it led to a lot of theorizing and theory crafting about Shadows of Evil. All this stuff really added to the mystique and just the originality of this map. It isn't flawless like I would almost argue DE is. Shadows of Evil has a few flaws for sure, but a lot of the things, everything that it does right, it completely excels and blows every other zombies map out of the water on. So a lot of ways it just drowns out its own errors. And if I had to play one zombies map for the rest of my life, I would pick Shadows of Evil. There's so many different ways you can play it and so much you can get out of it every time you load up the map. It is an absolute masterpiece, and I don't say that lightly. But yeah, that is going to be my maps ranked in Call of Duty Zombies from worst to best. This will probably be my list for years to come until the next Treyarch game comes out, and then we can probably do an updated one. But this is probably the longest video I've ever made on my channel, so if you made it this far, you are a literal living legend. Just leave a little emoji in the comments so I know you made it this far. Seriously, like, you're the best if you actually made it to the end of the video. This is well over an hour at this point, but thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, then be sure to let me know in the comments. Drop a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're brand new, and I also do stream over on Twitch. If you want to come hang out and follow me, that would be very much appreciated. Link to that's in the description. But thank you guys for watching once again. I sincerely appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next one. Take it easy, and peace out.